Later, as Jesus left the town, he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth.
"Follow me and be my disciple,"
Jesus said to him. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Later, Levi held a banquet in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with them. But the Pharisees and their teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples.
"Why do you eat and drink with such scum?"
Jesus answered them.
"Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent."
Hi, my name is Gigi Hall, and I'm actually part of the preaching team at the Hills. As you can see, I am with you from my home office, aka my bedroom. This is where I take care of business, and today we're going to be taking care of business. We are diving into Luke. We are finishing up, well, I shouldn't say finishing up. We are continuing on in Luke, and we are going to find ourselves in Luke 5. And before we dive into that, I kind of wanted just to open it up with a story. So my father passed away 7 days after my 7th birthday. And when I was 9 years old, I remember my world shifting with a single sentence from my doctor. There was news from my doctor that I would have to undergo colon screenings a full decade earlier than the norm due to my father's death of colon cancer at the age of 40. And it was a stark reminder of the fragility of life. It was like the silent threats that lurk within our bodies undetected until it's too late. And in that moment, I was confronted with the sobering reality that something within me needed attention, but also that preventative measures were necessary to safeguard my health. And so this experience that I went through, though it's deeply personal, but it also mirrors a broader truth that resonates within each of us. The recognition that there are aspects of ourselves that require some healing. And just as I had to acknowledge the potential risks to my physical health and take proactive steps, so must we all come to terms with our vulnerabilities, our spiritual maladies, and some of these things may go unnoticed until they have manifested in ways that we cannot ignore. And so, much like we turn to physicians for our physical ailments, Jesus stands ready as the great physician for our spiritual infirmities, as well as our physical ones too. But it's this first step towards healing with this acknowledgement and this admission that we are not immune to the trials of life and that we do require an intervention of Jesus. And recognizing our need for a doctor is really the initial step that we have to take for profound transformation that's at our disposal. And today's sermon is called "The Sick Need a Physician." And we are going to start our time in Luke chapter 7, verse 27. So it says that after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up and left everything and followed him. And so at first, what we see is Levi. And I want to kind of unpack what this tax collector, kind of some of the feelings that people had surrounding tax collectors during that time. Because tax collectors Levi, including everyone else in that profession, they were shunned by the Jewish people, and they were kind of deemed unworthy of acceptance by Jewish society. But yet, here we see Jesus. Jesus is extending this radical invitation to Levi, and it's a gesture that really challenges societal norms at the time and the religious conventions at the time. Because in the eyes of the Jewish population at that time, tax collectors were seen as thieves, and they were seen as unclean because they were traitors. They were taking excessive amounts of money from the Jewish people on behalf of the oppressive Roman government. So Levi, as well as all the other tax collectors, were considered to be corrupt, self-enriching, and lacking any sort of integrity. They were described as sinful. They were sinful figures who sometimes actually forced people to pay more than what they actually owed, so then the tax collectors could keep a little bit of extra. And so then we have Jesus, who was considered to be a rabbi and a teacher during that time at first, and he walks in, and he's supposed to be walking in accordance to the Torah and in accordance to the law. And so he was supposed to separate himself from sinners. Yet, as we read in Luke 5:27, we see this disruption occurring because he's welcoming Levi. He's welcoming the outcast, he's welcoming the sinner, and Jesus is shattering the barriers of exclusion. And he's revealing this radical inclusivity, and that's with his message. And this leads to my first point of the sermon, which is transformation is really available to us all. Each and every one of us. Transformation is available to us. And Levi's response to Jesus's invitation to transformation is pivotal because Levi chooses to accept the invitation. He rose from his booth and he left behind his livelihood. He left behind his career. He abandoned it. And this abandonment symbolizes this profound shift in Levi's priorities, in Levi's values, and he's embracing something transformative. He's embracing Jesus. And so in order to embrace Jesus, he had to leave that other stuff behind. It was a complete 180. And you see, similar to Levi, we're carrying some stuff. So Levi was doing some things within his career and in his profession, but we too are carrying around some stuff, carrying around sins and burdens that weigh us down, sins that really have separated us from God. But Jesus, even with all that, even through all that, Jesus still extends the same invitation for us today. And he's like, hello, here's the invitation, but what is required of you is to leave it behind and transform ourselves. And this transformation happens through him and us accepting the invitation. And then the verse continues. If you go back to Levi 5, we're going to pick up in verse 29. It says, Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, here's what I find amazing, because Levi is just like us, okay? So just like all of us, once we find out about something truly amazing and truly transformative, what is it? We become evangelizers. We are very quick to say, hey, have you heard about this new show? Hey, have you heard about this new vitamin that boosts your energy? Which is something that I really need. Whatever it is, when we experience something for ourselves that is truly transformative, we want to tell our community. Well, guess what? Levi's community was other tax collectors. Remember, he's been shunned by the Jewish population. So who he had within his community were other tax collectors. And so he invites his community over to hear from Jesus for themselves. And he invites people to his table. And he invites Jesus to be the guest of honor. And so what we're seeing here is we see the outcasts of society, kind of the marginalized of society, the ones who are deemed as sinners, the ones who have been on the receiving end of this exclusion, but they are embracing what Jesus is offering. And there were also, within that verse that we just read, there are also some who could not see. There were some among them, the Pharisees, who could not see, because they're the ones who brought up, well, why does Jesus eat with sinners and tax collectors? And so this now brings me to my second point of the sermon, which is our beliefs can prevent us from actually being transformed. So yes, the invitation for transformation is laid out in front of us, and it's inviting us in, and we can accept it. But sometimes it's our beliefs that actually prevent the transformation from actually taking hold and taking root within our lives because of those things, these other beliefs that we may have going on. And so the perception of Jesus's actions to attend a banquet by tax collectors, you see, this action was seen by the religious elite or the Pharisees of that time. It was pretty significant. They're like, oh gosh, Jesus is doing some stuff here. And to them, to the Pharisees, it may have seemed as though Jesus was actually flouting the law of the Torah. However, if you look a little bit closer, with closer examination, we realize that Jesus was not breaking the law. He was rather fulfilling the law. The law given to the Jewish people served as this guidepost, and the law revealed inherent limitations, really, of human effort in attaining purity before God. And so Jesus' actions symbolize the fulfillment of the law. It was this intervention that transcends human limitations and offers a pathway to purification and holiness that the law could not provide. Through Jesus, it is provided. And there is this quote that I had by John Owen. John Owen is an English theologian from the 1600s. He says that the law is holy, but it cannot make them holy who have made themselves unholy. It is just, but it cannot make them so. It cannot justify them who doth condemn. It is good, but it can do them no good, as unto their deliverance from the power of sin. So what Owen is reminding us of is the limitations of the law. It cannot make the sinner holy. Instead, and this is where the fulfillment of the law comes in through Jesus, instead it is through Jesus Christ the fulfillment of the law occurs. And this is where through Jesus true holiness and righteousness are attained, not through the law, but it is through Jesus. And so Levi's story represents the power of acceptance. It's a power that goes beyond the societal judgments and restores dignity to the marginalized. It restores dignity to the outcast. It restores dignity to the sinners. And the weakness of the law, it is not actually the law's weakness. The law was given to the people by God. But it's not the actual law's weakness. It really shows the weakness of humans. It shows our weakness in relation to the law. And the law is, as Paul writes in Romans 8:3, it is weakened by the flesh. And actually Paul says this, he says, for what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the flesh, God did by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. So Jesus Though it may have been perceived by the Pharisees that he was breaking the law, he was fulfilling the law. And he's providing the greatest transformation through himself. He's providing the greatest restoration to God through himself. So he wasn't breaking the law, he was fulfilling the law. And then it says this in verse 30. If we go back to Luke 5, it says this in 30. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, well, why do you eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance. And you see, let's hone in on the Pharisees, because the Pharisees were known for their very strict adherence to religious laws and traditions. And they believed in the importance of upholding purity and righteousness according to the Torah and according to the law. They believed that it was important to follow these laws and customs in order to remain pure and righteous in the eyes of God. The Pharisees were upset that Jesus was eating with sinners because they believed that association with sinners would defile them and make them unclean. So in their eyes, they were doing something right. You see, in their eyes, they were diligently following God's commandments and striving to maintain moral integrity. In their eyes, they were right. However, they had a very narrow focus. Their narrow focus was on legalism and what was happening outwardly. And this overlooked the deeper spiritual truths that Jesus actually embodied. Jesus was offering something very different, and they weren't able to see because their focus was narrowed. And so, despite their sincerest intentions, they rejected Jesus's teachings and opposed his message. And you see, the Pharisees looked at Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors, and they couldn't get past how Jesus was just breaking all of the rules. They couldn't get past it. They were just like, who did Jesus think he is? And they couldn't see Jesus's love and his mercy. They could only see him as breaking the rules. And just as the Pharisees questioned Jesus's association with sinners, well, we too cling to some rigid beliefs and maybe even traditions that make it hesitant for us to embrace the true transformative power of Jesus's love. And like those who thought themselves extremely healthy and in need and in no need of a physician, we may fail to recognize our own spiritual sickness because we all have stuff within us. And here's the thing, we all need a receptive heart to embrace Jesus. We have to be like Levi and actually grab hold of Jesus and leave the tax booth, because change often meets resistance. That's what happens. You change, you want to change, well, there's going to be some resistance, especially when it challenges our traditions and our comforts. And our legalism, and I'm not saying everyone is legalistic, okay? I love our church. We do a pretty good job. But even so, the church, the big C church, our legalism, and maybe even our stances on what we think is right can sometimes prevent us from experiencing this power that Jesus can provide, and this transformation that Jesus can provide, and this renewal that Jesus can provide. We must first acknowledge our need for a physician, our need for Jesus. Jesus is the great physician, but first we have to acknowledge that there's something that needs some work done. And so Levi's story serves as this powerful illustration of the radical inclusivity of Jesus's message. It's a message that transcends societal norms and religious conventions, especially of that time. And he really embraced the marginalized and the outcast. And he is still doing that today. He is reaching the sinners. He is reaching the marginalized. He is reaching the outcasts and those people who are deemed unworthy. And Jesus extended this invitation to Levi, and it was a call for Levi to leave behind his old life and embark on a journey of truth transformation. And Levi did it. He accepted it. And just as Levi responded to this call with courage and conviction, well, the call is to us as well. So we are also called to acknowledge our need for healing and renewing. And just like a physician can diagnose an illness, Jesus sees beyond the surface. Jesus knows what's happening in here and in here. And he offers something that's not just temporary, not just some Advil for that temporary headache, but really a complete and lasting transformation within our hearts and our souls and even the way that we think. And Jesus is just not content to leave us in our spiritual sickness. And so today, my challenge is for all of us to really examine our hearts and ask ourselves these questions. Are you clinging to old ways? Are you resistant to the change that Christ wants to actually bring? We still like to cling to old ways and old ways of doing things. Are you like the Pharisees, unable to see beyond your own preconceptions and prejudices? Or are you willing to follow in the footsteps of Levi and leave behind the past and embrace the power of Jesus? Because really, it's when we acknowledge our need for a physician that we can truly experience the profound transformation and renewal that Jesus offers. And he is the great physician. He is the healer of our souls. He's the healer of our minds, the healer of our hearts. And his way leads to true and lasting wholeness. And it is an invitation that is for us all, but we have to be willing to accept it and to acknowledge it and to leave the tax booth. And we have to let go of any old beliefs or any old way of doing things so that we can actually experience this transformation. Thank you for your time this morning.